Thank you to all of you for joining us today. This is our last workshop of the Career Paths event series in collaboration with the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. Over the last 6 months, we've had six, including this one, six really interesting and helpful workshops presenting their tools, the great work that they're already doing. And we really hope it was helpful for you as well. The one today will hopefully be as well. Today is all about explaining anthropology to the people in your life, something that everyone who is or has studied anthropology has probably been wondering or had to figure out at one point or another. And today, of course, the focus is particularly on potential employers and kind of like the professional world and trying to explain what you do and what you can do and what anthropology even is. Next slide, please. Today is kind of a special workshop in the sense that all three of them, Jennifer, Ryle, and Elizabeth, will be holding this workshop and sharing their thoughts and experiences and sharing some insights on this question. Yeah, and I want to hand over to Elizabeth to get started with the workshop.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so nice that you could all be with us today for our last webinar in the series. So we always start off each of these programs with a little bit of information about ACORN, the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. So our mission is to make sure that the next generation of students is well prepared for whatever job they hope to do after they graduate. In addition to that, we have many resources. The first one I'll call your attention to is shown on the right-hand side of the screen. It's a book, a paperback called Career Tools for Anthropology. It is available on Amazon for $10 US. We understand that there are some issues purchasing it in certain countries, and we are trying to fix that problem. If you want to purchase a copy and find it challenging, then I would say contact Jennifer Studebaker, and she will help you. So in addition to the book, we also have all of the tools listed in the book on our website. We have, in addition to that, we have many more tools that have been added since then, since the book came out about a year ago. ACORN also has a speakers bureau. So if you need an anthropologist working out in the world for an event that you are hosting, you can visit our speakers bureau and look through the bios and see if there's someone that would be suitable for you. We offer a blog. The blog posts come out twice monthly, and we would welcome your blogs, your blog posts at any time. Please contact me, Elizabeth Bryady, and I will put you in touch with our editor. For those of you who are interested in what we're doing with anthropology departments and programs, we have two initiatives. The first one, every fall and spring, we work with two professors and their classes to work on a client-based project. And that turns out to be fascinating, both for the students who get to work together on a project and for the instructor who has a direct connection with the client. And then lastly, we have a departmental advisory initiative to help departments really accelerate career readiness in their programs. We will come to a college campus for 2 to 3 days and work intensively with the professors and get them to the point where they're ready to create a career readiness plan for their department, which they then talk to us about, and we finalize together. And then over the next year, they work on it. So it's a great opportunity to help the entire department help students become more career ready. Next slide. So what will we cover today? The first point is we'll do a brief introduction and talk about why it's important to explain anthropology to somebody in your life. And then we will talk about how you actually do that. And you explain by using two different concepts, the concept of context, which is completely cultural, and the concept of narrative storytelling. Then we will go into how practitioners explain themselves in certain scenarios. There are 8 scenarios, and you yourselves will be then practicing one of those scenarios. You will do that in breakout sessions. We will all come back into the main session for a discussion and then a few remarks on closing. And now I'll turn it over to Ryle.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. It's nice to be back with you again. And I want to talk a little bit about why this is important for practitioners. A couple of years ago, Acorn did some Delphi research on younger practitioners, and we asked them several very simple questions. We said, what was missing in your education as an anthropologist that would have been helpful to you working as a practitioner? And one of the answers that came back was that nobody in their classrooms had really explained to them how to talk to other people about anthropology. And so you can see we've underlined some of the research findings. These are frequency responses, numbers of people that said this. Translating anthropology to industry was a big one for people. And the second one was communication, by which they meant, how do we explain ourselves once we're in the workplace? So this was the impetus for us to sort of get very interested in this idea of, so how do you talk about anthropology to other people? So let's go to the next slide and let's talk a little bit about how this works. What we found out when we followed up with some of our respondents was that actually people aren't that interested in anthropology itself. What they're interested in is understanding how anthropology can help them in the workplace. And so they don't necessarily need to know about theories or history or methods. They need to know, so how can you help us? And we thought about that for a long time, and we sort of did some focus groups and some discussions. And it occurred to us that this is very similar to what, believe it or not, magicians and salespeople do. They develop what in English is called a patter, P-A-T-T-E-R, a patter, a form of language which allows them to convince a client to do something. In the case of a salesman, it's to buy a product. In the case of a magician, it's to persuade them, the audience, that what they're seeing is actually real, whereas most people would realize it's not real. Anthropologists are not magicians. I'm not suggesting that, but they do something similar. And the point was made in this quote that I pulled out of a magazine article, which is that it's not just the ability to do the trick that makes a magician a magician. It's the context that that person creates that surrounds the trick that makes them effective. And that is exactly true for anthropology as well. Almost anybody can do a survey. Almost anybody can conduct an interview. But the anthropological difference is all about the context and the narrative that surrounds that. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind as we move through this. Learning to thrive in a profession. Let's just back up just a minute. I just want to read that last part. Learning to thrive in a profession differs from learning to perform the discrete skills. The real work of the expert is everything that happens around the skills. Okay, thanks. Let's go on and we'll see how this works out. So in order to make this real for people, for students and for younger practitioners, we can distinguish between the context in which this happens and the narrative that gets put into that context. So let's look at context first. Context includes the situations that practitioners find themselves in. And we spent a lot of time asking practitioners, what are the situations that require you to explain yourself to other people? And we'll go through 8 different ones. Elizabeth will walk you through 8 ones. You'll pick one of those to work on yourself, and then we'll hear from you how well you did. But generally speaking, those contexts break themselves up into 3 different categories. One is employers, the people who are going to make decisions about hiring you, the people who you report to, and who you are responsible to in your work. That's one important context. The second important context are your clients. Practitioners work essentially for clients. They have bosses in an organization, but they're generally doing work for other people. And these are people who have a lot of control over what you work on. They judge your results, and they basically determine whether or not you're going to get paid. So that's an important context as well. And the final context that we would draw your attention to is the general public, people out in the world. As an anthropologist, if you have things to say, how can you be convincing to those people when you stand up and say something? So those are the 3 different contexts, that 3 different categories of context. Now, the next thing is narrative. So let's look at that for just a second. Narratives are stories, and they vary in length, they vary in content, they vary in emotional weighting and so forth, depending on the context. But all of them do something similar. They create a connection between you and the people who are listening to you. So that's the important thing. The story is, in other words, is not just about you. The story is about you in relation to a group of people. And I think that's really, really important, because there's a tendency, at least in American society, for people to walk around saying, I have an interesting story to tell, you need to listen to my story. And a lot of people will look at that and say, why should we? So what? There's no connection there. So you need to be very careful about making that connection. The second thing is that if you're a practitioner, most of the people you're talking to are interested in getting some problem or other solved. And they're looking to you not as the sort of single answer to their problem, but they're looking to you to contribute to resolving a situation, or to following up on an opportunity, or to fixing a glitch in whatever they're doing. And so you need to keep that in mind too. So when you create your narrative, when you talk to people, keep a couple of things in mind. Demonstrate your own ability to solve problems. Make a connection to those problems that your listeners have. And then provide, if you can, examples from your own experience or from the literature. If you don't have an experience of your own, that's fine. But if you are reasonably well read in anthropological literature, you will be able to pull out 1 or 2 examples from what you've read and say, see, this is how this works. And you can use the STAR method, which I think we've talked a little bit about before, to structure your response. STAR, situation, task, action, results. Describe the situation, set out what needs to be done, talk to people about the actions that you carried out, the things that you did, and then finally talk about the results that you got. And I think the most important thing, especially for younger students, is don't fall into what we call anthrobabble. In other words, don't start spouting jargon at people. They won't understand it, they won't like it, and they will put you in a category of a smart person, but not somebody that's going to help us solve a problem. So those are the things that I'd like you to keep in mind as you work your way through these exercises. And the next thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about the contexts, the situations that practitioners find themselves in. And if you could do the next slide.
Yep.
Okay, so Elizabeth is going to talk about this to you guys, and then we're going to do some exercises with you.
Yeah, so, there are 8 different scenarios that we have included uh, in today's program, as well as in a new tool that will be made available to you, just finished last night. So the first 4 scenarios are shown on this slide. It's an awful lot of text, so maybe just listen. Because they're all different, and in part they depend on where you are. Have you already started to look for jobs? Are you already interviewing? Are you actually in a workplace now? So depending on which scenario fits you best, you'll have some ways in which to talk about anthropology. So let's go through each of them, but relatively quickly. So in the first scenario, and this happens to all of us, I think, nobody knows what anthropology is. You might be with your family, you might be with a group of friends, or in this case, you are with someone who is looking to hire a person, and that person says, anthropology? That's about dinosaurs, right? And you have to respond to that. So what do you say? How do you make it clear that anthropology is not about dinosaurs, but at the same time, you don't want to come across as very, I don't know, uppity. You want to develop a relationship with this recruiter. Who knows? It might actually lead to a job. So we suggest that you respond with humor. And one way to do that is, yeah, I love dinosaurs, but no, actually, anthropology is the study of humans. So you give them something and you kind of turn it into a little bit of a joke, not making fun of them, but just to let them know in a nice way that anthropology is about humans, and you do it with humor. And there are many other ways in which you could respond to that. And so we'll just leave it at that. But that's to respond to people who really don't know anything about anthropology and who are asking you a question. That's one way. That's the suggested way in which we think you should respond. A second scenario has to do with a person who is interviewing you over the phone for a possible job. Now, you don't know this person, you've never met this person, but the person has a question for you. Look, we run a business. I don't know how you can help us. And the person is very genuine. The person is very honest. So how do you respond? Well, there are a couple of ways you could do that. You could ask questions that relate to the business, or you might just talk about what you could do for them if you were hired. Well, I can help you expand your customers. Or I could say, I might be able to help you figure out what lessons you need to learn so that you can put them back into the culture on a habitual basis. Another way you could respond is, as Ryle mentioned, use the STAR method. And the STAR method gives an example from your life or from an anthropologist's life about what they have done. So you describe the situation. When I worked as an intern at such and such a company, and then what is the specific task you did? Well, I noticed that inventory was all messed up in this manufacturing plant. And then what action did you take? Well, one of the things I did was that I told the plant manager that people were hiding parts in their lockers, not because they wanted to create problems for the company, but because they were trying to avoid problems that would come and hurt their ability to do their jobs. And then what was the result? And the result in this case was that management was alerted and was able to fix the inventory system so that that kind of behavior went away. So STAR is a very useful way to talk about something you have done very, very quickly. If you don't have an example yourself, you can use somebody else's example, and there are plenty of good examples in the tool. We suggest one, but there are a couple of different books that are written about anthropology successful case studies, and we have referenced them in the tool. In the third scenario, you're invited to participate on a Zoom call, and you don't know why you're there. Somebody clearly recommended your name, and they want to know what you would do in a particular situation. And they know something about a thesis that you've written, but they can't understand how your thesis is connected to their problem. And so in this case, you could talk about how you might investigate the issue that they are concerned with, and you do it very quickly and easily. You could talk about how you know there are different models that people use to make decisions, and that those vary cross-culturally, and so that you shouldn't expect that people will always follow the same model, especially the same model that you do. The fourth scenario is interesting. You've now been hired by the organization, and the CEO wants to talk with you. But the CEO doesn't know anything about anthropology either. And so the CEO is saying, I trusted my people to hire you, but I don't know why we hired you. So what are you going to do for us? And so now you're back to the same place again. And there are lots of ways you can respond to that question. You can say, hey, you know, one of the things anthropologists are good at is observing people's reactions, especially their silence when something is happening. That usually means that they have responded positively or negatively, depending on what their nonverbal behavior indicates. Another way that you could respond to this boss is you say, hey, listen, I can find inconsistencies between what people say and what people do. And that is helpful because it will tell you whether or not your strategy is working. Could we go to the next slide? Now with the next scenario, number 5, you are among people that are part of your new work team. And they are completing a proposal, and that proposal has some other people working on it who are not anthropologists, and they don't know what you do. So in this case, you have an economist, you have a sociologist, and you have some person who knows about how to train people. And the proposal is really about figuring out training and the best ways to get it done so that the people who are getting the training keep coming. These are people who have lost their jobs and they are getting retrained to do something else. But there's a problem. They're not all coming to the training. So you start problem solving with this group and say to your colleagues, your work colleagues, has anybody spoken with anybody who has been unemployed? Do we know what kinds of training would be really helpful to them? can we do some exploratory research that helps us learn about what their thought process is? The next scenario, making your case to the skeptics. In this case, the sociologists and the economists don't agree with you, and they are arguing for the way in which they would approach the problem. And it's almost like they're getting into an argument with you. And so you've got to de-escalate. You've got to help them calm down a little bit and just think clearly. And so you know they're really making fun of qualitative data because they don't value qualitative data. They value quantitative data. And so, you know, you just state very clearly, qualitative and quantitative data are different and they serve different purposes. How about if we use both? How about if we start by collecting some qualitative and then move on and do a quantitative survey? So that might be a way to respond in that circumstance. And then the next one is about convincing a client. And the client really wants to fund the proposal that you've written. But they're worried that other people in this state organization who will know about this funding will not be convinced that you can do a good job. And so how do you respond to help this person who's the head of contracting be able to make a case on your behalf? So this person is asking for your help. And so in that case, there are many different ways you could respond. And you can pick whichever works best or a combination of those. So for example, if he's making the case, it just takes too long to do interviews. It's so much faster to do a survey. Well, one way to respond is, yeah, interviewing does take a little bit long, but we only need about, I don't know, 12 to 20 surveys, and we have a pretty good idea of what is going on. And so the interviews can save you time in the long run. And we know when to stop interviewing. We don't continue doing interviews forever. We end when we think we're ready to end, somewhere between 12 and 20. And then the last case, the last scenario is, how do you present to a general audience so that you're not talking to them as you would to your peers who are academics, but as regular, ordinary people? And so in this case, you're giving a presentation and you want to make them feel good about the fact that they helped you with this project. They've come to hear what the final outcome was. And so you start with a success and you give them a statistic, you know, something like the training program that we instituted helped 85% of the people find jobs. And then you talk about how you did it. You used mixed methods. You used qualitative and quantitative methods. And then you emphasize their role because all these people participated in your project. So you thank them. You were partners with us. We couldn't have done this without you. And then maybe you talk about a couple of stories. So it shows the value of anthropology, stories that you would not have gotten through a survey. And maybe a chart would be helpful. And then you say, you know what? You can use this same approach in other projects that you're working on. So those are the 8 scenarios, and you will get to choose which of those 8 you now work on. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah. And I'll be talking through this. So as I noted in the chat, as we were going through each of those, we wanted you to start thinking about which of these you want to practice. Okay, so for this exercise, you'll be practicing in small groups. So we'll be moving you into breakout rooms of around 3 or 4 people. And I'll put this in the chat so you have it for reference, but you'll want to take the first 5 minutes to choose your scenario and quietly work on your response. And then you'll go around your group and each take 2 minutes to practice your response to that scenario. And then in that last 6 minutes that we're going to give you, you're going to give each other feedback on the responses. So you can say, hey, you did this very well, or maybe there's an opportunity of like, you know, what could be improved in terms of the response. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and also drop in the list of the scenarios, but the tool that we shared with you, you should have all of these scenarios written out in. So that PDF that was shared, go ahead and take a look at that if you're not remembering what was happening in the particular scenario. Oh, the numbers didn't come through, so in my copy and paste, but we'll have this in the chat as well. And feedback. And Olivia will place you into random groups. If there's a scenario where, you know, you join a group and the rest of your group disappears because they decide they don't want to talk to anybody, feel free to come back to the room and we'll move you into another group as well. All right. Any questions before we go into the exercise? All right. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing for now. But yeah, remember that tool has all of these scenarios written out if you need it for reference. And I believe the breakout rooms will be open soon. Well, everyone, welcome back. How did it go? Does somebody want to share? You can unmute yourself or raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Got Cynthia with a hand up here.
Hey, Cynthia. How'd the practice run go?
The practice run is good. So we actually had a discussion table about anthropology. It's a notoriety in Italy, Canada. We talked about the individual circumstances of the participants. Like, for example, in Italy, there's no such thing as an entry level position that
Mhm.
that will apply to. That just doesn't really exist, in my opinion. So that's what we talked about. What I was just going to say is for me, I was essentially trying to give them a sort of outsider perspective because both of my participants come from very close neighboring regions within Italy, and they're familiar with the system over there, but they're not so familiar with the system here in Canada. So I was trying to give them my own background and perspective. Like like they were just saying that we're discussing like the question why should you hire an anthropologist, and I used my experience, being a dual citizen, two cultured, maybe even three cultured person, of just just using whatever things you have in your life, skills, background, experience, to help you apply. I think it's been a very important conversation to be had, because it allows us to understand the sort of cross-cultural differences in anthropology, how anthropology is practiced around the world. Like, for example, in Italy, Fabio was telling me that his work is primarily community helping people
Mhm.
out, mothers with issues, health issues from different parts of the world, including Eastern Europe, which is the same continent, just different regions. So we essentially talked about that in particular. Ariana shared with me her story of being a student in Italy, and how like the challenges she faces in explaining what anthropology is, if I'm correct, Ariana. Um, and and how she markets anthropology to recruiters after she graduates, or if she's already graduated and she's just recently graduated. So that's essentially what we talked about. It was a very rich conversation, and we exchanged a lot of pieces of information. We listened thoughtfully with each other, and we actually managed to connect across time zones, countries, regions, and from both sides of the Atlantic.
That's wonderful, Cynthia. I think that's a great example. Yeah, Ryle?
No, nothing. Let's hear from somebody else. What else have we got?
Did anybody find the exercise challenging, or like maybe have some realizations as they did it?
Hello. I found the exercise quite challenging because I'm still a student and I haven't like gone through any job applications, and it really did make me think like I mean, almost just reading it, I felt really illegitimate, and I felt like, well, it's true, like what skills do I have as an anthropologist? What actually could I like benefit to a corporation? And yeah, I just felt like it was actually quite challenging, and I was trying to respond, and I was like, but I have no experience to draw on. I've never helped a business before, and it was actually quite like challenging to think about.
Yeah.
It gets
Yeah, but
easier.
I was going to say it's probably good to do it in this context rather than in the actual interview itself, too. And yeah, there's a few books that we've referenced in there, the Anthropology and Praxis books, where they have specific case studies. And those ones, I think it was Ina Gardner where she says store-bought's fine when you're cooking. So I think in this, like, you can do secondhand stories of anthropology success, I think are fine in these types of scenarios, too.
Yes, it's really important, I think, to do a little rehearsing in your own mind about these things. And then also to listen to other people and learn from them about how did they respond to these things. There are a gazillion different ways to respond. But I think the point we're trying to make is that life comes at you fast. And you will find yourself at some point in a situation where somebody does ask you, in public, in a meeting, in an interview situation, a very direct question. And so there's not one right answer, but there is this sense of how do I respond to these questions in a way which satisfies the person who's talking to me, that I am in fact a competent professional. There are many ways to do that. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. That's the other thing. So it's not like you don't have to get it right the first time. This is a safe space here where we are, and there are other safe spaces in your classrooms, with your friends, and even in preliminary interviews. And eventually you will get quite good at doing this kind of thing.
So yeah,
maybe
Olivia shared.
a good point to end. Thank you all so much for joining. This was the last of our workshops, as I mentioned in the beginning, in collaboration with Acorn. Thank you so much to all three of you and to Acorn in general for all of your time and your effort and sharing your amazing tools with us. And you can rewatch all of the workshops. All of the recordings are on our YouTube channel, which is linked here, as well as on our website. And the recording of this one today will also be up very soon, and we will let you know when it is out, as well as the slides and all of the tools that Acorn has shared with us over the last few months. We really hope it was helpful to you, and we hope you also will have a great summer wherever you are, at least a great time off, and not have to think about your career for a little bit at least, and just to get to enjoy it. And stay in touch. Feel free to suggest any more topics you would like us to cover after the summer or in future events. You can submit them just via email, or also there's a Padlet where you can suggest topics that you would be interested in for this event series. I also shared the links to the Applied Anthropology Network's website, as well as again to Acorn's website if you want to learn more about our activities or what they're up to. Yeah, thank you so much for joining, and we hope you have a good rest of your days. See you soon. Bye.